Hey you, hope you're having the best week ever. Today I'm going to give you some tips on waterbird photography. I'll show you a video with some photographs I took first, then we'll get into some tips and behind the scenes footage. A lot of you have requested this one, so I'm hooking you up. Enjoy. Okay, so now let's get into the tips and how I shot those photographs. Tip number 1, know your subject. There are generally two types of birds that hang out on the water: wading birds and waterfowl. Wading birds do not swim. They wade into the shallow waters to catch fish. These are birds like cranes and heron. Waterfowl, on the other hand, they do swim, and they spend most of their time on the water swimming around and diving for food. Birds like ducks and geese. You'll also see birds of prey near the water, but they don't swim or wade. They sit in the treetops and swoop down on their prey. In my area, that's mostly hawks and eagles. Wading birds are my favorite to photograph because they hang out near the edge of the water and move a little slower. They're easier to find, usually larger, and not as challenging to photograph. I'll ride around in the boat searching for them on the edge of the water, then slowly and quietly approach them. Using a trolling motor, I can position the boat to obtain the composition and framing I want. Regardless of the type of bird, they're all skittish, so if you move too fast or make too much noise or get too close, they'll fly away. Approach them quietly and slowly. Tip number 2. Know your gear. I mostly shoot with Canon gear for wildlife photography, specifically APS-C or crop sensor cameras. Paired with the EF 70 to 300mm lens, I'm able to fill the frame with the subject from a pretty good distance. 300mm on a crop sensor camera is a 35mm equivalent of 480mm. Nothing under 300mm has ever worked for me. I need the extra reach and distance to get the shots I'm after. Unfortunately, Canon cameras don't have the greatest dynamic range, so if I run into a situation where my subject is white or bright and the background is dark, I compensate by underexposing my shot. If not, my highlights are blown out. You can recover details in the shadows of an image, but you cannot recover the blown out highlights. This can also happen with a dark subject and when the sky is in the background. If you expose for the dark bird, the sky will be blown out. I underexpose in that situation too. I've also run into autofocus issues when shooting birds. Canon cameras have a great autofocus system, but when using the optical viewfinder, you can run into problems when the bird's color is similar to the background color. You'll need to get closer, wait for the bird to move to another background, or use manual focus. Regardless, use the single point focus type and always focus on the bird's eye. There's nothing more frustrating than getting home after a long day of shooting, reviewing your images, and the one that's perfectly lit, perfectly framed, perfectly composed, and the bird's face is out of focus. You'll be bitter. Something else to consider is your shutter speed. My lens has IS, image stabilization, but it cannot compensate for all the moving that's going on. You're on a boat that's moving and rocking, the birds are moving, your hands are moving. You have to keep that shutter speed fast. If you'll notice, in the shots I showed you, my shutter speeds range from 1/600 to 1/1250. If your shutter speed is too slow, you'll get motion blur, ruining your shot. Maintaining a minimum shutter speed that's the same as your focal length is just not enough. Depending on the situation, sometimes I have to increase my shutter speed to more than double my focal length to get a crisp, clean shot. If you're unsure, preview your image on the back of your camera and zoom in to check for motion blur. Don't be afraid to increase your shutter speed. You can compensate for a dark exposure by increasing your ISO. As long as your ISO stays under 800, you're good. I always shoot in manual mode. Sometimes I'll set my ISO to auto, but I'm always in full control with manual mode. Tip number 3. Avoid midday. Lighting is everything, and if you shoot midday with a clear sky, your images will look like crap. The sunlight directly overhead will give your images harsh shadows and washed out colors. Go out early in the morning or in the afternoon. Personally, I like the afternoon because if I hit the lake around 1 o'clock, that gives me some time to survey the situation, see where the birds are hanging out. Then I can get my game plan together, position the boat, gear up, and start shooting around 3. That puts the sun at the perfect angle. If it's super cloudy when you're out, you really don't have to worry about it. The clouds will soften the sunlight. If you have no other choice but to shoot midday, it can be done, but you'll have to find birds that are in the shade. This will limit the amount of shots you can get, and they won't look as dynamic or have any depth. In other words, they'll be flat and boring. Lighting can either make or break your shot. Tip number 4. Pay attention to the background. When you're composing your shot, make sure the background isn't distracting. If the background is busy or the same color as the bird, your photograph won't be as powerful. You want your subject to stand out. With a long telephoto lens, you'll get compression, which will help isolate your subject, but a lot of the time the birds are too close to the trees, the banks, or the roots behind them, which makes it hard to blur out the background. Sometimes you have to be patient to wait for the bird to move to a position where it's not so close to the background. The goal is to isolate your subject to make it stand out. And last but not least, relax and have fun. Don't sweat it or overthink it. Photography is not just about capturing moments and memories, it's also about the journey and the experience. Enjoy being outside in nature, the sun, the water, the fresh, clean air, and the animals. We're blessed to have these opportunities. Take the things that I've shared with you today and use them. Every time you go out and shoot, your photographs will get better and better. Well, that's the end of today's show. Remember to be kind to one another, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.